don't buy that this is an insurmountable challenge that the greatest country in the world is incapable of confronting.
The president is literally an existential threat to America.
I wanted this novel to be broken apart purposefully. It's a careful orchestration of an explosion.
Russia's Interior Ministry dropped all criminal charges against an investigative journalist, citing a lack of evidence. Moscow police had arrested Ivan Golinov for dealing drugs, but Golinov says the drugs were planted on him to silence his reporting on corruption. Supporters took turns protesting because a solo demonstration doesn't require a permit. Alabama is requiring sex offenders whose victims are younger than 13 to get chemically castrated if they want parole. It's the seventh state that now uses testosterone inhibitors and appears to be the only one to require them for first-time offenders. But it's unclear how effective the drugs actually are, and there are concerns that the measure could constitute cruel and unusual punishment. Botswana's highest court has effectively decriminalized gay sex, which once carried a 7-year jail sentence. A panel of judges ruled that parts of the country's colonial-era laws were unconstitutional, and one judge said that sexual orientation is, quote, not a fashion statement. The group that crowdsourced $23 million to speed the construction of President Trump's border wall has built its first half-mile stretch in New Mexico. But there's one gaping problem: an open gate. Officials with the International Boundary and Water Commission chained it open because the wall crosses federal property, blocking an access road the commission uses to reach floodgates and a riverbed that they're required to maintain.
Greetings from the future. I am standing in Ottumwa, Iowa, 1 year from the day you're sitting in right now. The general election is fully underway. The Democratic primaries have, for the most part, ended. Iowa, a swing state, is at the center of both parties' strategies to win the White House. Democratic nominee Joe Biden is on a swing through the state with a stump speech trashing the incumbent president.
Look, I believe that the president is literally an existential threat to America.
Meanwhile, the president, who needs to win this state again if he wants to stay president, is in Iowa too.
America must never again be held hostage to foreign suppliers of energy as we were under the Obama-Biden Sleepy Joe group. Sleepy Joe.
Today, June 11th, 2019, was the preview of the general election many Democrats want and many Republicans dread: Biden versus Trump.
The fact of the matter is that 4 years of Donald Trump will be viewed as an aberration in American history.
A lot of Democrats think Biden is their best choice to un-Trump the White House. And they think it mostly because he's a white guy who polls well with white voters and with brown voters. A lot of Republicans quietly agree on this assessment. And today really did look like the general election. Outside Biden's first event here in Ottumwa, conservatives were protesting him like he's already the nominee.
How can you vote for someone who has betrayed his Christian faith?
And inside the event, Biden was heckled over abortion rights by a conservative, just like a Democratic nominee might.
No, that's okay. No. This is not a Trump rally. Let him go.
At his event, Trump gave a classic Trumpy speech.
He said my name so many times that people couldn't stand it anymore. No, don't keep saying it. Sleepy guy.
There was so much back and forth between these two that you'd think the Democratic primary was over, which is exactly what Joe Biden wants you to think.
Let's make America America again.
Biden's the frontrunner, and he's doing the thing frontrunners do: act so much like the nominee that it becomes impossible to imagine him not being the nominee. The strategy rarely works, mostly because the moment that someone becomes the clear frontrunner is the same moment that all the other candidates gang up to take them out.
After weeks of threatening escalating tariffs on all goods imported from Mexico, President Trump suddenly backed off on Friday after Mexico apparently agreed to clamp down harder on the flow of Central American migrants heading north to the U.S. Under the deal, Mexico will deploy National Guard troops to its southern border with Guatemala. and allow the U.S. to expand a program that makes asylum seekers wait out their cases in Mexico. Trump celebrated the deal as a triumph.
For many years, people tried to get what we got in a period of a couple of days, and they couldn't get it.
But so did Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. On Saturday morning, thousands of Mexicans gathered in Tijuana to watch him take a victory lap.
Celebramos el importante acuerdo de ayer. Agradezco también la solidaridad de los mexicanos que no titubearon en manifestar su apoyo en la defensa de la dignidad de nuestro país y preservar la amistad con el pueblo de Estados Unidos.
Earlier in the day, volunteers from López Obrador's party gathered to get the celebration started.
¡Viva Tijuana! ¡Viva López Obrador! Es un honor estar con Obrador. Es un honor estar con Obrador.
Esto nos da mucha alegría, nos da mucho gusto, porque significa que hemos triunfado, hemos ganado, salimos adelante.
Sí hubo concesiones por parte de México, ¿no?, con respecto al tema migratorio para llegar a ese acuerdo. Y hay aquellos que dicen que el acuerdo representa una capitulación por parte de México frente a Estados Unidos.
Fíjate, Noriega, que sí hubo una respuesta, pero que era algo que ya estaba por nosotros acordado.
It's true that López Obrador didn't make any new concessions. If anything, the deal gave him cover to pursue controversial policies he was pursuing anyway. López Obrador is already more popular than any Mexican president in recent memory, and he's learned to use threats from the north to unite his base. He even got some migrant advocates to back the deal by promising more resources for Central Americans who find themselves stuck in Mexico.
¡Viva México!
Yo te conocí en el refugio, en el albergue que maneja tu organización, ¿no? Este acuerdo, de cierto modo, quiere decir que va a haber aún más migrantes centroamericanos esperando sus casos en este lado de la frontera, ¿no? Claro. Pero entonces, aún así, lo apoyan y aún así apoyan al presidente.
A los presidentes o las administraciones pasadas no hicieron nada. Ahora que esta nueva administración, que no son los mismos partidos políticos, que están entrando un partido nuevo, hay que darle la oportunidad también de que trabaje. En 6 meses no puede arreglar las cosas.
Internamente, por ejemplo, no estamos de acuerdo en muchas cosas. Nosotros no queremos que militaricen la frontera sur.
Claro.
Como le dijimos a Trump que no queremos que militarizara. Pero nosotros ahorita estamos en torno a nuestro presidente. De entrada, tenemos que apoyarlo y respaldarlo. Y hemos avanzado.
Cerrando fila.
Pero cerrando fila.
Despite the fanfare, the agreement will almost certainly do nothing to mitigate the actual crisis. Last month, the number of families and children apprehended at the border continued to climb to unprecedented levels. Just across the border from where López Obrador gave his victory speech, a shelter that opened in response to the emergency has seen more than 16,000 migrants cycle through its doors since it opened in November. Recently, the shelter saw a wave of migrants with the flu. Doctors who work there say many of them got sick in overcrowded federal detention centers.
Pues cuando venimos, lo primero que fue a ir al médico. Por lo mismo, por la enfermedad y todo eso.
¿Y cuando llegaron acá todavía estaban enfermos?
Exactamente, todavía veníamos con gripa.
¿Dónde agarraron la gripa?
Y la agarramos en lo que fue el trayecto de migración.
¿Eso cómo fue? Es decir, ¿fue porque había otra gente con gripa donde los
así
tenían
es,
abandonados?
ya venía gente infectada y como estuve bastante tiempo, entonces la niña ya al cambio de 6 días ya empezó a sentir calentura.
This shelter opened when the federal government, which used to help asylum seekers reach their final destinations, started instead to release families in border cities with virtually no support.
Good to see you. See you soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Nathan Fletcher, a member of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, helped secure a disused county building for the shelter to expand, and is now working to find them a permanent location.
Donald Trump effectively ended the safe release program, which has worked for decades, and I strongly believe they only did it to manufacture a crisis. This gives them something they can go on Fox News and talk nonsense about. It gives them something to tweet about. But they're essentially creating a crisis to inflame their base because they think it helps their politics.
I understand where that's coming from.
Right.
But at the same time, you have 132,000 people, most of them families or unaccompanied children, crossing the border in a month. Isn't there a crisis there already, even before the way that the administration is responding to it?
And you cannot convince me that a country that 40-something years ago could put a man on the moon and bring him back cannot today figure out how we process families and give them safe shelter while we determine the validity of their asylum claim. I don't buy that this is an insurmountable challenge that the greatest country in the world is incapable of confronting. I think it's a president who has an agenda, and he wants to drive an agenda, and he wants to inflame an agenda. And I think that in large part he's succeeding in that. We just have to make sure that failure doesn't have dire consequences both for these migrant families and for the broader communities that we all represent.
When it comes to immigration, the Trump administration has a habit of painting a distorted picture of conditions on our border.
You have people pouring in, and it means crime, it means drugs, it means so many other things.
But when it comes to the alarms officials are currently sounding about the government's capacity to fund the shelters that house immigrant children, those are real. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, which oversees migrant shelters, says the program for migrant kids could run out of money soon. Last week, it announced that it can no longer afford services it says are not necessary, like education, recreation, or legal aid for immigrant kids in their care. The administration is asking Congress for more than $2.8 billion in supplemental funding. The crisis has come to a head in Washington, where House Democrats who control the appropriations process want to provide funding, but don't want to hand Republicans a blank check for their immigration agenda. It's not clear lawmakers will meet halfway before the money's gone. There are more kids than ever in ORR's care, 13,200 as of last week. So far this fiscal year, 56,000 kids have been caught crossing the southwest border, nearly 80% more than this time a year ago. The existing shelter system is strained. Over the past week, HHS has announced it's opening at least 2 new emergency shelters in Carrizo Springs, Texas, and Fort Sill, Oklahoma, with more still being considered. Emergency shelters like Homestead in Florida are taking in the overflow, costing around 3 times a standard shelter's nightly price per kid. We spoke to current and former employees of major shelter contractors. They don't yet have full contingency plans in place, and they haven't ended classes or cut outdoor time yet. One organization, BCFS, has committed to funding education and recreation themselves. But as of May 22nd, shelters aren't allowed to submit for reimbursement for services HHS doesn't see as essential to health and safety. One organization is already going through the line items, assessing what they might be able to move around and argue is critical for health and safety. Things like movie nights and field trips are on the chopping block. Outdoor time is something they may argue is, in fact, critical to the children's health and safety. What employees and lawmakers alike want to avoid is creating idle, detention-like conditions for kids. Both parties say they want to send more money to the border, but they've been wrestling for weeks with how it can be spent. Connecticut Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, a Democrat, oversees the subcommittee that appropriates money to HHS.
We're prepared to provide $2.9 billion to move forward, but what is the path forward for children being moved through the system? Tell us about that. Secondly, what are the safeguards? Are these children in state licensed facilities? I don't think that that's unreasonable. Is the facility adhering to the forest standards, which is for the safety and the well-being of kids? How do we should be hiring additional federal field specialists, case management people to expedite the placement.
Vice News reached out to the Department of Health and Human Services for comment. They said they've told shelters to begin scaling back on these services and added that additional resources are urgently required to meet the humanitarian needs created by this influx. They didn't answer specific questions. Current and former employees of these shelters say they aren't just focused on the funding decisions that get made in the coming days. They're trying to read the tea leaves. Is being in a state of crisis going to be constant? Are emergency shelters with less oversight and less instruction for kids going to be the new industry norm? We don't know. For now, though, they're just focusing on how to keep operating tomorrow.
Hundreds of demonstrators are staging a sit-in overnight to protest Hong Kong's Legislative Council, which plans to consider a bill on Wednesday that would allow suspects of a crime to be sent to mainland China for prosecution. Hong Kong currently has no extradition agreement with China, and protesters worry the Chinese government will use the new law to silence its political opponents, who in the past have spoken out with relative freedom. The demonstration follows massive protests on Sunday, where more than 1 million people, a seventh of the population, turned out, most of them wearing white.
我希望最尾係可以退到嗰條惡法啦，因為如果咁多人行出嚟都冇辦法嘅話咧，咁就都好難搞啦。
People see the extradition bill as China's latest effort to chip away at the political autonomy and freedoms that Hong Kongers were promised in 1997 when the British handed the island over. That autonomy is spelled out in the Basic Law, which is effectively Hong Kong's constitution. Things that aren't permitted in mainland China, like political opinions that go against the state, an independent press, and the right to protest, are allowed in Hong Kong because of a policy called One Country, Two Systems.
我因為好懷念英國時期啊，我係喺香港土生土長嘅，個高度係比而家係差好遠嘅。我唔再信任大陸。
That policy has effectively let Hong Kongers express dissent in a way that others on the mainland, like Tibetans and Uyghurs, can't.
而啲人會送到去大陸咧，係俾人哋受審而好唔公平咁樣受審咯。咁變咗香港嘅司法制度就會完全咁樣去破滅瓦解咗。
The Basic Law says Hong Kong's, quote, way of life is supposed to remain unchanged by the mainland's socialist systems and policies until 2047. But China already has taken steps to erode it. In 2014, Hong Kongers started the so-called Umbrella Movement in response to an electoral reform plan that would have let citizens vote for the chief executives, but only after China had approved all the candidates. That plan was quashed. But in the years since, China has barred anyone advocating self-determination for the island from running for office. And even after Sunday's mass protest, Carrie Lam, the island's Communist Party-vetted chief executive, vowed to pursue the extradition bill.
There is very little merit to be gained to delay the bill. It will just cause more anxiety and divisiveness in society.
But there's already a tremendous amount of anxiety in Hong Kong. Union members are worried China might target organized labor. Catholic priests are anxious about a potential crackdown on missionaries. And artists like filmmaker Jamie Chi believe the law will make it harder for them to do their work freely. Chi is convinced that Lam is going to push the law through within a few weeks.
It shows that she doesn't care about those 1 million people that came out to show that they do not support this law. It will affect a lot of Hong Kong people because it will impose a fear on us and that we won't be able to speak the truth if we're always living in fear.
My mother has no interest in my literary life. She goes to my readings, and it's the funny thing is she doesn't look at me when I read. She sits adjacent to me and looks at the audience. And I said, Ma, what's going on? She says, well, I want to see what your words make them feel. I like it when their mouth opens a little bit when you're talking. My name is Ocean Vuong, and I'm here to talk about my debut novel, On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous. Little Dog is a refugee. He comes to America at age 2, and he grows up in this household of women in Hartford, Connecticut, this broken town decimated by the opioid epidemic. The novel takes the form of a letter written from a son to a mother who can't read.
The very impossibility of your reading this is all that makes my telling it possible.
How many times have we talked on the phone with those we love and we say, well, how are you? How are you doing? Oh, fine, good. How's the weather? What happens when we want to say the thing we need to say to those we love most and we can't do it? The novel was organized in vignettes. And I wanted this novel to be broken apart purposefully, and that to be broken is not to be wrong. It's a careful orchestration of an explosion. Little Dog is an interpreter. He translates America for his elders and his community.
Can you read this, you said, and tell me if it's fireproof?
Now, normally we think, well, there's no reason for a woman to be obsessed with a fireproof dress. But that alone tells you what she's seen. Trauma changes our DNA, and it informs how we look at the world.
Your hands are hideous, and I hate everything that made them that way.
As somebody who grew up in a nail salon, I wanted to reveal a huge swath of American life. What is seemingly just a place for beauty was actually a place where children are raised, meals are cooked. A workshop for beauty was also a workshop for life.
Don't draw attention to yourself. You're already Vietnamese.
Language is real. The power of it is that it gets deeper than any human touch. If I were to touch you right now, I would only get to your skin. But when I speak to you, I'm all the way through.
You hear me? You're a monster. And with that, her head is lopped off its shoulders.
A lot of things can't be translated, especially grief. And I think that's why he keeps the secret, this love that he has for this white farm boy.
What were you before you met me? I think I was drowning.
The fear, the danger, the awkwardness, I wanted those feelings to be as large as weather. I wanted them to be climates. It's sacrilege to reveal sexuality. And he keeps it in this letter. And he even says that, Ma, the only reason I can tell you this is because I know you can't read it. Is it worth it to speak our truth when no one hears us?